The Accountant was an action movie from almost a decade ago that kind of flew under the radar, but ended up being a pretty intense and entertaining ride from start to finish. Now, here we are 9 years later, and we're getting a sequel that promises to be bigger and better than the original film. So does it actually make good on that bold claim? Not entirely, but it gets surprisingly close. The Accountant 2 stars Ben Affleck and Jon Bernthal, and it follows forensic accountant Christian Wolff as he teams up with his estranged but highly lethal brother to track down mysterious assassins after an old acquaintance is murdered. Okay, so everyone knows by now that I am an action guy through and through, so you better believe that I would immediately be seated for a sequel to a little underrated Ben Affleck gem that kind of just seemed like it popped up out of nowhere. I absolutely love seeing Hollywood pumping out some good old-fashioned mid-budget action films again, because it's clear that at the end of the day, audiences are still craving a healthy dose of testosterone and cheesy one-liners. So I'd say I walked into The Accountant 2 with some pretty modest expectations. I wasn't expecting it to be better than the first film or anything like that, but I was confident that it could still offer up a pretty good time. And I'm happy to report that while the story is messier this time around and there's far less actual accounting going on, The Accountant 2 is definitely a fun and exciting time at the movies. Now let's start by talking about the performances here, because the obvious reason you're buying a ticket to see this movie in the first place is because of this buddy cop 1-2 punch dynamic that Ben Affleck and Jon Bernthal are bringing to the table. It probably won't shock you to hear that this project doesn't have an unbelievable script or a one-of-a-kind concept, so it's going to firmly rely on the shoulders of its two main stars, and this pair teaming up for an action movie in this way is a match made in heaven. Ben Affleck does a pretty good job playing our main character here. Over the years, I've really come to prefer him in the director's chair for the most part, outside of a couple of his recent roles like in The Last Duel and whenever he played Batman, but he's solid here, and a big reason for that is because of the dynamic that's established between him and Jon Bernthal. I have loved Jon Bernthal ever since he was on The Walking Dead, and if you want a good chance of making a halfway decent action movie sequel, you crank up the amount of screen time this guy has to the max, and that's exactly what they did here in The Accountant 2. When it comes to the story they decided to go with this time around, I feel like they kind of spread themselves a little bit too thin, but also let the plot take more of a back seat, which isn't necessarily always a bad thing when it comes to an action movie if you know you're able to make the other areas of the film be up to snuff, which they mostly do. Not only is it less focused than our first romp, but there are a surprising amount of side quests in this film that solely exist either to emphasize the quirks of our main character or to really let our lead actors chew the fat as these two brothers in an exaggerated comedic way. Like if you want to see Ben Affleck go speed dating with a bunch of moms or line dancing at the local honky-tonk, you're definitely in luck here. And even though that sounds like a knock on the film, and it kind of is, it's hard not to just enjoy the ride we get taken on here, because more often than not, they hit the nail on the head with the buddy cop film tone, even if what it's showing us really isn't actually progressing the narrative all that much. Let's talk a little bit about the action in the film, because if you're familiar with the first movie at all, then you're walking into this one expecting a few fistfights, some bullets flying, and a whole truckload of precise mathematician energy. The action is probably more on the small scale side this time around through the first two acts, but that's only to make way for a massive and sprawling gunfight that takes place towards the film's conclusion that had me absolutely locked in from start to finish. I mean, these guys basically army of two their way through an entire battleground, and it is a beautiful sight to see, let me tell you. It really closes out the movie with a bang, but the majority of the sequences before that are more intimate, one-on-one Jason Bourne type of combat situations. And don't get me wrong, they're pretty well done, but as someone that loves how intricate and grand the action is in something like the John Wick movies, this large-scale confrontation they give us towards the end really pulls a lot of this film's weight for me in the explosions and gunfire department. Overall, guys, The Accountant 2 definitely surprised me in more ways than one. It's probably funnier and more self-aware than the previous film, but it's also more messy and convoluted when it comes to the story that's at the center of it all. Ben Affleck and Jon Bernthal seem to have effortless chemistry together as these polar opposite siblings, and they are really the driving force behind seeing this film on top of the satisfying action going on throughout. Not quite as good as the first movie, but definitely still a sequel that's worth your time. The Accountant 2 gets a Sully score of 3.5 stars. So that's my review of the latest action film. What do you think is your favorite one released this year so far? I'm probably going to say The Gorge from Scott Derrickson, but let me know in the comments below what you think. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys at the next one.